Welcome back, everyone, to Brighter Morning with Bo. Dr. Bo Tiwari, who is vacationing and working in Washington, is joining us now. Doc, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Rishi. How are you?
I am good. A lot of excitement here. I think you're missing it. From Parliament yesterday and, of course, last night, we would have learned of the passing of Imam Yassin Abu Bakr as well.
Yes. So I heard about that, yes. My condolences to his family and to his Jamaat and members of the community. And on the matter yesterday in Parliament, I did, after it was all over, took a look at what transpired in the Parliament. So I have a sense.
Yeah, so a lot happening, and I see we do have former Finance Minister Larry Howai with us as well. Good morning, Mr. Howai.
Good morning to you, Rishi, and to Bo, and of course to all the viewers.
Doc, I'll hand over to you now.
Okay. Good morning, Larry. How are you going?
Well, thanks, and I see you in Washington. I hope whatever the trip is, it's very productive.
Yeah, well, I mean, I try to mix a little work and relaxation. So I think I'm doing okay on both. I come home next week.
Good.
But I wanted to ask you, I mean, we were supposed to talk about economic issues here and about financial issues and about the state of the economic prospects for the country. And we will do that this morning. But I wanted to ask you, Larry, since you are here and Rishi raised the issues yesterday, I wanted to ask you if you have any thoughts on what transpired in Parliament yesterday.
Yeah. Well, actually, I didn't see the actual discussions or even the two press conferences after. But of course, this is a very serious issue for the country. One of the most important things and in fact, the basis on which you develop any country, including the issues of economics and financing and everything else, is the institutional arrangements that exist within the country to ensure that there's transparency and so on, but also that there could be full participation in a meaningful way by the citizens of the country. And, to some extent, that is something that perhaps did not quite occur yesterday, in the sense that the debate didn't happen in the way that perhaps one would have expected it, so that all the issues could have been ventilated. So that is an issue. And of course, I've heard comments being made about the possible effect it could have on investments and potential investments and so on in the country. And it is true that, investors do look at that. I mean, it is not the most important thing. Investors still look at the opportunities that might exist in addition to all the other constraints. But the potential that the entire issue could have for derailing some of the things that need to be done in order to get the economy moving again and for the country to return to normalcy is something that we have to take into account and consider very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem with this particular crisis that we have, in which the institutions have failed us because of the manner in which people in high office have conducted themselves. And because of the sense of things not being proper, I don't want to say impropriety, but a sense in the population that things have not been properly done. I think those things are not good for Trinidad and Tobago. And as you say, the tone of the politics and the level of combat among the high offices in the land and between the political actors in the country, and now the presidency has become highly politicized. Some would say perhaps by Her Excellency's own doing, but also by the manner in which the thing has been brought into the public sphere. I think that, to the person looking on from the outside, um, thinking about the society and its possibilities for investment and for what can I say, stability and sustainability. I think people become more cautious rather than energetic about their prospects in the country, because there are many big issues, which is that what are the prospects for continuity of policy? What are the prospects for cooperation on matters of national importance? If you have the people in high office constantly in battle with each other on these matters, if you have the constitutional framework disturbed constantly, if you have the institutions not functioning, what are you going to end up with eventually? And I think those things can be quite disturbing to the outsider, to the outside onlooker, you know.
Yeah, and I think you hit something on the head there, very, very important. This whole issue of cohesiveness. You know, the thing is that given where we are in the context of the pandemic, there's and the effect it has had on not just the economy but the society as a whole, and particularly on the lives of individuals and their ability to find meaningful livelihoods as a result of the effect on the entire system. I think it is very important that as we look to start rebuilding, as we look to reset, as we look to start moving ourselves out of this pandemic, that the most important thing is the cohesiveness that we could achieve as a people in achieving the objectives that we have to achieve. It requires people at all levels, at civic society levels, at trade union levels, at political levels, at business levels, in academia, and so on, to all come together in a very cohesive kind of a way. And I've seen this done in other countries, even in Barbados, close to us, going back many years ago. Barbados had real problems. I mean, they do have problems now, but going back into the early 90s, for example, and you saw where the trade unions, the government, and the business came together to form a kind of social compact that formed the basis on which the economy was able to get back on its feet and start to rebuild again. And that is what we need today in the society. We need that ability, and we need to be able to bring all the varied aspects and the intellectual capital and the social capital that we have. This is not only about financial capital. This rebuilding is about all aspects of capital, and very importantly, the institutional framework within which all of that is located in order for you to be able to achieve what you want to achieve. And that is something that, so I think in listening to you, I think you hit the nail exactly on the head by talking about this whole need for cohesiveness at all levels and the effect some of this can have on the ability to create that cohesiveness as we go forward.
Yeah, people, I think when you look at a society, you don't expect, you expect the government to play its role, you expect the opposition to play its role, you expect various institutions to play its role, you expect the presidency to play its role. And sometimes things happen and it causes problems, but in the combat or the conflict that emerges, the objective must be to serve this society, make this society better, heal this society, bring the people together for a national purpose. And I think those elements seem to be missing, and that becomes a very disturbing element in the governance of our country. I am not pointing fingers at anybody. I am not blaming anybody, but I am talking about the psychological and emotional, and I would say mental state of the population when they see this on the one hand, especially given their COVID conditions in the aftermath of all this economic stress that they have been going through. And when you have people looking at, I mean, the world is in a kind of turbulence now and uncertainty. And when you are trying to attract people to come to your country and invest and make a commitment to your country, these things become very hard to sell when you have this kind of situation going on. I must say, from a national point of view, while I mean, I myself have spent many of my years in politics and have been involved in combat and have been involved in important issues always. I've been in government, I've been in opposition. You yourself have been in government. But at the end of the day, what the people want ultimately is to be able to live their lives, and for people who are in government and opposition and in parliament and in roles of authority to govern well. And that has not happened in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that is what is disturbing. And it is a source of continuing distress in the country.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you framed, whatever discussions we have subsequently in this way, because we tend to think so much about financial capital, and we tend to think so much about economics and so on, that that's the way the economy and the country will move forward. But there are other aspects of capital, as I mentioned before. There's social capital, there is institutional capital, there's political capital, there are, and in a sense, social capital is much more important than any type of capital. We've seen countries like Japan and Singapore, for example, without any natural resources, being able to build their economies on the basis of their human capital, on the basis of creating the kinds of social cohesiveness and social frameworks. Not that there will never be disagreements. Always there must be disagreements and healthy tension if any society is to develop. But it is very important that we understand that the basis of development, while financial capital is important, and I'm in no way diminishing that, much more important in my view is social capital and human capital in being able to achieve what we need to achieve. So I think, in a sense, while this is not the context of our discussion, that such a discussion cannot go forward unless you deal with the broader issue that I mentioned.
Yeah. Okay, but let's move into some of the issues now. I think it's important that we discuss that though, Larry, because it's not. I mean, many times when I write about how the Minister of Finance operates, I would talk about the fact that it's not only an accounting exercise of revenue and expenditure, um, deficit, and so a debt. Although those things are critical, it is more than that. And I think what we have just discussed related to yesterday is important. But I will go on to some of the issues now that are equally important on the economic and financial side. I will start with the budget. I had you on right after the budget. Or I think it might have been before, right? We talked
No, it was
before the
after.
budget.
It was the day
It
after.
was
Yeah,
after. Yeah,
yeah,
and
the day after.
but we had you on for a short time, and you made
That's
a
right.
few points. Now that you've had a couple of weeks to reflect on that, um, what do you think will ultimately be the impact of the budget? I think in this particular budget, the finance minister made some overtures to the private sector, but at the same time, it is clear that he is relying heavily on the price of oil and gas um, to 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 bail us out again. It is very difficult. Most of the things having to do with the private sector have been done for about 3 years. So, in a sense, he's given the private sector about 3 years to make its presence felt in terms of economic action. Um, and there are members of the private sector who have been on my show subsequently who said that, all the incentives that are given are things that can only be benefited from after a year in a difficult economic situation, whereas what the private sector needed was a series of incentives and frameworks that would allow them to be buoyant now and move to the state of revival and then look at the prospect of recovery and then see how they can grow and look at exports and so on as they transform their economy, their businesses, because the digital transformation is almost a necessity now. How do you look at the Minister of Finance's budget now? Because you must have been speaking with people since. You must have been having a sense of what people are thinking. And now, on reflection of the budget, how do you see it now?
Well, I think basically this is more a holding situation, or almost a holding pattern that the minister is in. You're quite right. There were no real major revenue generating measures in the budget, which is important if government is to bring its position back into balance. In the past 5 or 6 years, we've had about $61 billion in accumulated deficits. And when we add the $9 billion for this year, 2021-22, you're talking about 70 billion in deficits. And so therefore, the minister himself is looking at that. It's not that he is oblivious to it. He's aware of it. But I think the decision that he made was, this is not the year to do anything that could potentially cause any disruption. As you quite rightly indicated, he expects output to go up in both the gas and the oil sector next year. He's mentioned 3.3 to 3.6 billion cubic feet a day in gas, and he expects the oil output to grow above 60,000 barrels a day. So he's expecting that. He's building it also on the basis of strong energy prices and commodity prices over the next 12 months. And those are the things that really, in a sense, he has put as a basis for growth or for government revenues in over the next 12 months. There's been no real additional revenue generating issues other than mentioning the property tax and, of course, the Revenue Authority, which is looking at as initiatives to eventually start to help with the process, but it's not going to help in 2021-22. The only real measure that will see us to the level of revenue that the minister is looking at is really what is happening with oil and gas. I think that's the real focus. Now, he has mentioned, to be fair, a number of other initiatives that the government will be undertaking. The problem is, of course, the whole issue of implementation. There are so many things that are mentioned in the budget. Many of them we have no idea about where they have reached in terms of the status of implementation. And we know that the public service has real challenges in terms of its ability to deliver on a number of issues. And therefore, that is also going to be a major challenge. So while there has been some talk about some things that the minister would like to do, I think the budget is really predicated on what's going to happen with the price of oil and gas and what's going to happen with output over the next 12 months. And I think that is where it is. And and really the whole issue is how do we get the economy reopened next year so that subsequently, so in a sense, 2021-22 is seen perhaps as a year when everything will stay as is. There will be nothing to create any additional changes or disruptions. And perhaps after 2022, the minister will be looking at what additional things could be put in place. For example, there's been talk about electricity and water rates and so on. And, presumably that will pick up and will take place perhaps towards the end of 2022 going into 2023.
Yeah, it baffles me that the government wouldn't understand and budget for and create the conditions for making it happen the following things. One, a boost in agriculture and food security. Now, they've put $300 million there, but I don't know that there is an active plan that can address the production, logistics, distribution, export, issues related to agro-processing, etc., in a systematic and sustainable way that would allow for growth, let's say, over a 3-year period or a 5-year period that makes a difference in import substitution in the food sector. I cannot understand how they would not address some of the infrastructure issues that lead to perennial flooding that undermines the irrigation issue. In Trinidad and Tobago, in dry season, you have no water. In flood season, you have everybody living with water around their homes. I can't understand those basic things. And I can't understand how the minister could seek to mask the foreign exchange situation by putting the IMF $644 million in it, by taking amounts from debts, from loans that we have gotten and putting them in the foreign reserves, by taking the HSF money that has been withdrawn, putting them in the foreign reserves until he is able to use it. And the export sector, which is critical, I think he did make some positive moves on that, focusing on the manufacturing sector, but they've also got to focus on services. I don't see how these 4 or 5 things the government could ignore. Yes, if the price of oil goes up, fine. If the price of natural gas goes up as it's going up, fine. But you've got to address this foreign exchange issue. You've got to address, and you can't mask it and tell the population that we are okay. You've got to address this food issue. You've got to address these issues of infrastructure that make it difficult to have sustained productivity in the country and disrupt lives. And you see, what I am missing in all of this is that we've had this crisis, which the whole world has now. And here we have an opportunity because of this crisis to rethink, to reframe, to restructure, to make new interventions that will make a decisive difference in a climate in which people will understand that you are doing this because the situation offers us an opportunity to live better, to do something better. And I'm not seeing it.
Yeah. Well, as you quite rightly say, this gives us an opportunity as a country to reset. And I think there has to be a whole of government approach. And what I mean by that is that each minister in each area has assets available to them and capabilities that could allow us to rebuild each of the sectors. Because make no mistake about it, this pandemic has really created a significant level of dislocation for everything. And therefore, this gives us the opportunity to reset, to rethink, as you say, reframe what we're going to do and how we're going to do about it. And have each ministry, for example, when I say each ministry, what I mean by that? For example, you've spoken about IT. IT being a critical element in, in making your economies competitive and in using the human capital we have to create more value going forward in the future. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Alphabet, has said that, look, artificial intelligence is going to be as pervasive as electricity in the years to come. And I agree with him. Everything is going to be driven by artificial intelligence. Everything is going to be managed differently. Productivity levels are going to increase exponentially. And we need to determine how we will position ourselves within that framework. What are the aspects of that industry that we will focus on? Where will we attract foreign investment within that framework to allow us to be able to leverage these possibilities? Because this is, remember, there used to be an industrial revolution, and then over time, people took advantage of that to build their economies. This revolution that is occurring in information technology, it's nascent, and therefore it gives us the opportunity to jump on the bandwagon. And when I say nascent, in a sense, I mean, this kind of revolution started as far back as 1980s, where with laptops and desktop computers, and then the initial phases started. Silicon Valley was now being developed and so on in those days. So when I say nascent, it's not nascent in the sense that it only happened in the last couple of years. It's been developing, but it's at an early stage in its formative development. The Industrial Revolution started in the 17th century, and it continued up until the 20th century. So in the lifetime of these kinds of developments, it is nascent, and therefore we can use this opportunity to start identifying how we want to position ourselves in the same way we did for the gas industry. So we have the intellectual capital, we have the human capital, and we need to determine how we're going to leverage ourselves to achieve those things. Let us look at sport. I mean, sport is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The English Premier League is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The NBA, the NFL, we have sporting facilities with the right kinds of public-private partnerships and so on, can coalesce and develop so many communities and could lift the level of competitiveness to such a level, in the future that could put Trinidad on the global map as far as sports is concerned. And more than that, there's the ability for sports tourism. There are all kinds of things that flow from that we can develop and we can take advantage of. But we need to stop seeing these assets as assets that are costs to us. So we have to maintain an aquatic center. We have to maintain a cycling velodrome. No, how do we take these assets and convert
How do we
them into things
monetize them?
that will lift us? Sorry?
Yeah, we've got to turn these things into foreign exchange earning opportunities. The same thing with things like cuisine and culture and so on. I mean, all our artists. I mean, the way you do that, we had things that we used to try like Panjas, and we have Carnival, which has collapsed because of the pandemic. And I have no doubt that when it is resuscitated, it will be really great. But we've got to build sustainability in these things for the foreign exchange earnings. And it is great to get foreign exchange from manufacturing, but that is a slow process that depends on the penetration of markets. Whereas by bringing things to you here, as you suggest in sports, as you suggest in medicine, as you suggest in entertainment, you can bring a lot of foreign exchange in the country. And people, have been locked down for many years. They will come to places in which they could have a different experience. and in which the climate is conducive to not only doing what they want to do, but having a safe and quality experience when they come into a strange place or in a foreign land. So I want to,
Yeah.
when we look at
And
the horizon, though, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the point you've made about, you see, the thing is, you're not going to replace oil and gas as a generator for an exchange in a short period of time. But if you're able to galvanize a number of sectors, the small amounts coming in initially will eventually grow and will eventually get you to do some of the things you want to do. For example, I mean, education facilities. We've invested a lot in education. We even have some of the nascent things like the drilling school, the aviation school, the nursing school. There are things that could generate foreign exchange earnings because there were a number of foreigners who came to Trinidad and Tobago in order to attend the drilling school, for example. So the aviation school. So there's opportunity there to develop those things. In manufacturing, I was talking to the chairman of Mitsubishi some time ago, and he was talking about, with relatively small levels of investments and with some of the gas that we have and so on, there are a number of things that manufacturing facilities that could be developed. And when he said small investments, he was talking 50 to 100 million US, which is big for us. But it's small in the context of an LNG plant and a methanol plant and so on, right? But nevertheless, it creates a lot more jobs. It gives you a lot more opportunities for export and so on. And those are things, for example, health facilities. We have, we have so many doctors. We have so many capable people here who we can join together. Where there was, as you know, the initiative of a cardiac center here in Trinidad, with a private and international private investor and so on, coming together to help with that particular process. So again, there are things that we can attract into Trinidad to help use the human capital, the financial capital, and the assets that we have, the physical capital, to create new avenues for revenue generation and foreign exchange generation in the years to come. The ports, for example, is one area that the minister has mentioned and work has started, and that is progressing. But again, that is something that, again, as you know, there is huge capability for that development in Trinidad and Tobago, given our position, geographic position, and so on. I mean,
Yes,
so there are a number of areas
it,
that,
need, it
we
needs
haven't spoken about tourism and, yeah.
it needs leadership and organization, and I think that is the missing ingredient everywhere. And I'm sorry to say that, I mean, the government is not showing the kind of leadership that is required to get these economic things done. And you can't tell the private sector you've been closed down, we're opening up now, and it's up to you. I mean, you've got to get those things done. But let me ask you a hard question, Larry, because we are already seeing in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed all over the world, the President of the United States has been talking about it. This logistics crisis, which is really increasing prices all over the world. And we have an inflationary effect because of that. The cost of living, cost of everything is up. And it's not only here, it's everywhere. The second thing is that people are beginning to talk about stagflation now, all right, which means to say that you have dampened growth or very little growth or no growth, and you have a rising inflationary situation on your hands. And the IMF has begun to warn countries about the relationship between monetary policy and fiscal policy and economic strategy, and the need to be very judicious about how you proceed in order not to create a financial crisis in the world system. I mean, you are a person who looks, you look at things from a global perspective to understand what needs to be done here and how you need to organize your business here. You think those things are real threats in the immediate present, I mean, I'm talking about over the next 2 years, for instance.
Howai,
Yeah, well,
before you continue, we just have about a minute to go, so we'd have to leave it there after this response.
All right. Okay, Larry.
okay. Yeah, first of all, growth, I don't think is a problem. Next year, as countries start coming out of the pandemic, you will see growth. Inflation is, I think, a temporary phenomenon. As you quite rightly say, I am involved in discussions with a number of international institutions, Morgan Stanley, PIMCO, a number of them I meet with on a regular basis as we talk about what happens in the global economy. And the feedback I have, and I agree with, is that the inflation expectations for the time being are expected to be temporary. Now, all these things have probabilities around them. In other words, it's probably, I think, 60% that there'll be no sustained levels of inflation, but there's a probability that you could get some sustained inflation and therefore higher interest rates and tighter fiscal policies and tighter monetary policies and so on. But at the end of the day, at this stage for the next year or two, I don't think you will see any of that. You will see higher inflation. That will happen because of the logistical problems and so on. But as those things get unsnagged, and as the effects of artificial intelligence and the IT sector and improvements in productivity and all the other things start to kick in, you'll see a countervailing energy.
Mr. Howai, I do apologize for having to cut you mid-response, Doc, but that is all the time we have. So I'd like to thank you both once again. Doc, I know you'll be returning next week, Wednesday, but that is how we have to end the show for today, so thank you very much.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Larry.
Yeah. All right, Andrew
We'll
Chan
talk
comes
again
up at 8 o'clock with the newscast.